Hey, welcome all. Thank you for joining the call. Today we have with us Kalyan and his team, Dogan and Salman, who will be talking about MSAL.js and web applications, using MSAL.js, React single page application, integrating with Azure AD and a lot of things that they have planned to do. As always, it's a very interesting call. Feel free to chime in to ask your questions. The recording of the call will be available on our YouTube channel. We'll be sharing the link on the chat window. And we have a lot of exciting calls lined up every third Thursday of the month. So feel free to join in and enjoy the show. Thanks a lot. Over to you, Kalyan.
Thank you, Nandish. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kalyan Krishna. I'm a product manager in the identity division focused on developer experiences, especially around our identity SDKs and Microsoft Graph. I'm here with my team members, Dogan and Salman, and together we would be doing this session where we would be basically walking developers who use the React framework on how to use our MSAL React to integrate their JavaScript applications with the Microsoft Identity Platform, that's Azure Active Directory for some of you, and make calls to Microsoft Graph. Now, the topics that we'll cover are essentially the most basic bare bones that a developer needs to do to get their JavaScript React applications working, integrate with Azure AD in the right format. And we think this will be a valuable session or a recap session for those folks who are already familiar with the platform. So what I will do next is I will hand over the control to Dogan. And Dogan, would you like to introduce yourself and Salman?
Thanks, Kalyan. So, hey, everyone. I'm Dogan. I'm an engineer with the Identity Developer Guidance team, and I help folks to integrate their JavaScript applications with the Microsoft Identity Platform.
Hi, everyone. My name is Salman Salem. I'm also a developer in the Identity Guidance team.
So today's agenda is that what we would like to talk about is, first, we would like to have a brief look at MSAL.js and MSAL React in particular. And then we're going to discuss how to use MSAL React in a React single page application. So this is mostly going to be live coding together. We're going to look into enabling single sign-on for our application. Then we will try to acquire an access token for Microsoft Graph, and we will call Microsoft Graph. After that, we'll have some time to discuss continuous access evaluation events and how to handle those in your JavaScript application. And we will cap the session with deploying our app to Azure Static Web Apps. Then hopefully we'll have some time to discuss next steps and any questions you might have. So without further ado, I'll start discussing the Microsoft Authentication Library for JavaScript. It's essentially a collection of packages for JavaScript applications to enable them acquire access tokens for various kinds of APIs. It has mainly two branches. We have MSAL node, which you could use in your server side and desktop applications or applications that are running on various kind of devices. And then we have MSAL browser, which allows you to acquire tokens in your applications running in the browser. So it has two wrapper libraries on top of it, MSAL Angular and MSAL React, targeting the Angular and React frameworks, respectively. And today we are going to focus on MSAL React. So MSAL React acquires tokens using the authorization code grant with the proof key for code exchange flow. So this is a mechanism that prevents authorization code replay attacks. It supports React version 16 and later, and also React-based frameworks like Next.js, Gatsby, Jekyll, and etc. It supports server-side rendering with some limitations. And if you're already familiar with MSAL browser, it exposes the same public API, so you'll have access to the same classes and methods. But on top of that, it adds templates, hooks, and higher-order components that you can use in your React application. So how do you use MSAL React in your applications? Well, the happy path would be you register an app on your Azure AD, depending on your scenario. You go grab a code sample or two from aka.msaad code samples, and then you'll start coding. So what we are going to do today is that I want this to be a live coding session. So I have a sample app here in this repository. You can go ahead and clone this repo, or rather fork this repo, I would recommend. And then clone it and follow me along as I go forward. So just a couple of prerequisites. You're going to need Node.js versions 14 or later installed on your system. You're also going to need an Azure subscription to deploy our app to static web apps. And of course, you're going to need a GitHub account to fork the repo. So I'll stop here and go to my code to look into how we can enable single sign-on. So here's my application. This is the repo I've been mentioning. A simple React application. At this moment, it has no authentication functionality. I've created this using the Create React App tool, which I'm sure many of you are familiar. And it also has some libraries like React Router and Material UI for designing our UI elements. So I'm just going to install my dependencies, then start this app and just show you what we have there already. So this is going to be running on for 3000. And there we have it. So it's a very simple app. I have a navigation bar here. I have some buttons for sign in and sign out. They don't do anything yet. I have a text here to identify the signed in user. And then I show some text on my home page. Then I also have a profile page, which I'm hoping to eventually display the actual data from Microsoft Graph. Right now, I just have some dummy data. So let's go ahead and add authentication to this application. I'm going to keep my console open just in case. OK, so the first thing we need to do is that we need to install the necessary dependencies. So these are, let's save them as well. And MSAL React. So I'll go ahead and install them. While this is happening, we can start coding here. So the first thing I need to do is that I need to instantiate a public client application object from MSAL browser. So I'll go do that. I'll import the class first. And then I create an instance here. Now, I need to supply some configuration options to this constructor. In particular, I'm going to need a client ID, an authority, and the redirect URI. So I don't have these yet. And I'm going to talk about these configuration options in more detail later on. But let's go ahead now and register an application with Azure AD so that we get these parameters. So I'll go to my tenant. I'll click on the Azure Active Directory service. I'll select App Registration. And I'll create a new registration here. I'm going to call this MSAL React Demo. I want to sign in users only in my own tenant. So this is going to be a single tenant application. And I'll also need a redirect URI of the type single page application. So this is important, not web, single page application. So let's go ahead and use our default route. And we register this. Perfect. So I have an application client ID here, and I have a tenant ID here. And if I go to my authentication blade, I can see that I configured the platform to be single page application with a redirect URI 3000. And I go to my API permissions blade. And there I defined a permission for user read for Microsoft Graph, which is the user read permission. This will allow me to access my profile information, or rather the signed in user's profile information on Microsoft Graph. So that's all great. I'll just copy these values. I'll get this client ID. Go for that. For authority, I'll go back and look at my endpoints. So this is the endpoint that I want to authenticate against. Loginmicrosoftonline.com signifies that I'm authenticating to the global Azure instance. And this ID is my tenant ID. So I'm going to authenticate to my tenant. We'll copy that. And we'll also write here the redirect URI. Well, I'm going to use a relative path so that it's easier to deploy our application. We don't have to come back and update this redirect URI later on. And that's pretty much all I need. Now I need to pass this object to my application component as a prop. I'll go ahead and do that. I'll call this MSAL instance. And I also want to start this, keep it running. So let's go to our app component. This is a very simple component, and I only have a couple of pages I serve here. So what I want to do here is that for every component that needs to access the authentication state, the MSAL React context, I need to wrap all those components between the MSAL provider component. So I'll import that from MSAL React. Thank you, Copilot. I'll go ahead and do that. Now let's also define our prompt. Thank you. And what I need to do now is that I need to pass this application instance to the MSAL provider. Awesome. Now all of my components have access to the MSAL React context. What I will do next is that, well, our application doesn't do anything yet. Let's refresh this. Now I want to add the sign-in functionality. So when I click on this, the app should sign in. So one thing important to mention here, if you realize I instantiate the public client application outside of my component tree. So this is important because I don't want this to get reinstantiated every time React re-renders my pages. And now let me go to the sign in button and add some functionality to this element. So there are many ways of doing this. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to use a hook provided by MSAL React, which is called use MSAL. Perfect. Now I can get access to the application instance we created earlier. And when we have access to this instance, I can access the APIs MSAL provides. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a method here. And what I will do is that I will access this, oops. And I will use the, let's just login redirect. So this API will take the browser, will redirect the browser to Azure AD, and there it will prompt the user to sign in with their username and password. You can also pass a couple of options to this guy. I want to add scopes user read because I want users to consent to this permission when they first sign in so that we can get an access token for this later on. And I'm going to go ahead and add this to on-click events. There we go. So I'll go back to my application. And I'm going to click on this sign in button. So if you already have an established session with Azure AD, let's say if you already signed in to your tenant somewhere else, this should briefly take me to Azure AD sign in page. And since I already have an active session, I shouldn't need to re-enter my password. Now, I don't think I have an active session. Okay, unless you have multiple active sessions. In that case, you will see an account selection screen. So I'm going to pick this test account I have, Diego. And I'll enter my password because I don't have a session active yet. And then I see this consent screen. It shows that sign and read your profile and maintain access data that you have given access to, because I'm also going to get a refresh token later on. We will discuss these in more detail. So I'll accept, and I think I signed in. I don't know, because there is no indication on the UI. So we should definitely take care of this. But I know I've signed in because I can see my authentication artifacts in the session storage. Now I'm going to talk about what these things are in more detail later on. So first of all, I want to sort this UI a little bit. I want to have some indication that the user is signed in. So let's go ahead and do that. MSAL React provides us with the necessary tools to do that. So first of all, I want to render some of the elements conditionally if the user is signed in. To do that, there are multiple ways. First, let's use a hook provided by MSAL React called useIsAuthenticated. You don't need the full path, thank you. And let's define a variable. Thank you. So now that I have this, I can conditionally render these guys. And I also have this welcome name component that shows welcome. So I'm going to do the same for this guy. Nope, just this. And if the user is not signed in, just show nothing. There we go. So right now, since we are already signed in, we are only seeing the sign out button. I still have to work on this text. And I want to also update these guys as well. So I'll go back to my home page. I want to show this text if they are not authenticated already. So to do that, I could use the same hook, or I could use a template provided by MSAL React. So this is called authenticated template. And we also have an unauthenticated template. So I'll go ahead and use these guys. Perfect. Copy this as well. Okay, let's put this guy here. And this guy here. Oop. So that's great. Now I go back to my application. Okay, I'm just showing this text. Now I want to show the signed in user's email or username or some sort of identifier so that we can know who is signed in to this application. So how can I do that? I'll go to that relevant component, welcome name, and there I want to access the current active account that has signed into this application. So the way I'm going to do this is that I need to use MSAL hook to get access to the application instance we created. I'll do that. I'm also going to need some state variables. So let's do that as well. Use state. For the moment, we can leave them blank. I need to import these guys too. Use state, and I'm also going to use effect from React. There we go. Let's use the use effect so that when this component mounts, we want to get the current active account. So to do that, let's get an access to the instance, application instance. And there, let's check for the current account. This API is called get active account. And then if I have an active account, I'm just going to set the username from that account. And I also want to update this part. So this is going to be username. And I think we have it. Now I go here, I refresh my page, and I see nothing because I never set an active account in the first place. There are some accounts in the cache, and if I want, I can query them. I can find the account, but that's going to be messy. So we don't need to do that. We can handle this much easier. Oh, I need a dependency here. Yep. So the way we're going to do this is that we're going to register an event, an MSAL.js event. So MSAL.js fires events with respect to various things that's happening in the application, like if the user signs in, if a new account is added, if it tries to acquire an access token, and etc. and etc. So what we're going to do is that we're going to add an event for login success event, which will fire when someone successfully logs in. So let's do that. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to check for event type. And MSAL has several event types defined. So I'll go here and find that. And there I want the login success event. So when this event fires, what I want to do is that I want to set an active account as the event payload account. I also want to just console log the event. Let's see what's there. So, okay, we registered our event. So one thing important to remember about events, since we registered this event outside of our component tree, I don't need to do anything special. But you can also register these things inside your components. And if you do that, you'll have to keep in mind that you have to appropriately unregister this event when your component unmounts. You can look at the code examples to do that, but I don't need this at this moment. So I'll go back to my application, and I still have no identifier for the user. Why? Because this event never fired. So I need to sign out and sign in again. So let's go ahead and sign out. Well, we can't. We don't have the functionality yet. So I'll go to my sign out button, and I'll add that. Just as we did with the sign in button. There we go. Thank you, Copilot. And we'll add this event. Don't click. Again, this API accepts a bunch of parameters that you can customize the sign-in process, sign-out process. But at this moment, I'm going to use it as it is. So I'll go back to my app, and now I should be able to sign out. There we go. Sign out of Diego. OK, now I'm going to sign in again. I'll have to enter my password because I just signed out. And here we go. Yeah, this time we can see the username here. And also we have logged this event payload. So let's take a look at and what is there. So when someone successfully signs in, MSAL will send a response that contains a host of information. You have your access token there, which you should normally never log out. You have your, when this token expires, you have your account information, you have your ID token information, and etc. You have your ID token claims, and a host of other information is available to you. So let's clear this guy. Don't do this at home. And I want to take a stop here and just check with you if you have any questions so far.
Kalyan has done a great job answering questions to us, Salman.
Awesome.
We have one question from Rafiki. Is the MSAL library doing an authorization code flow with APKCE, or is this an implicit flow?
No, definitely. The MSAL browser and MSAL React are using the authorization code flow with Pixie. That's right.
Okay.
All right.
That's it. Let's get on with the session.
Sure. So when we sign in, the most important artifact we get out of that process is the ID token. We get an ID token, and that tells us lots of things about the signed in user. So I just want to take a moment to go back to our slides and discuss what is in the ID token. And right after that, I'm going to start talking more on single sign-on process. So let's take a look at the ID token here. So here's a decoded ID token. Your ID tokens obtained from Azure AD will be base64 encoded, but you can decode it using the jode.ms website if you like. And here you have an audience claim, which tells you that which application this ID token was issued to. So in our case, this is going to be our application's client ID. We also have an issuer claim, which will contain our tenant ID. And if the user belongs to some security groups, they will also appear in the groups claim. The user's name will appear. The object ID is an immutable identifier, which identifies that particular user across all tenants. If the user have any roles, they will appear there. The user's tenant will appear here. And if you have any Azure AD roles assigned, these are different than Azure app roles, and they will also appear in the ID token. And you can also customize many more claims to appear in the ID token so that you can modify your application to make use of these. So I'll go back to my app. And what I want to do is that I want to go ahead for the single sign out. So there's a couple of things to discuss there. So MSAL provides a SSO silent API, which will attempt to sign you in without any interactions. And we can go ahead and code this. But there are some caveats, which I will talk about. So let's do that. Let's add this to the pages components so that whenever someone hits to my application, it runs immediately. So I'll go ahead and, oops, I don't need this, I think. I'll go ahead and use the use MSAL hook again. And I also want to check the authenticated state. I'm going to use the use is authenticated hook. All right. And I also want the use effect hook from React so that this runs when the component mounts. So we'll go here. And there, if the user is not authenticated, nope. Oh, I see. And if that's the case, then, sorry. Let's fire the SSO silent API. Now, this API, like the login redirect API or login pop-up API, can take in a bunch of parameters. So I'm going to pass the scopes. But most importantly, you will most likely want to pass a login hint to this API so that it knows which account to automatically sign in the user. So I'm going to talk about in more details about this. So let's get the promise and do something with the promise. And let's also catch any errors. Just going to display them. We can handle them maybe later on. And we're going to have the response here. So let's use the response to set an active account here. This is a separate event from login success. And okay, so we have some caveats to discuss when we are talking about this API. I'll go back to my slides here. So if you want to enable single sign-on between multiple apps, well, one approach is that you can have SSO between tabs for the same app, instance, if you simply set MSAL's cache location to local storage. We will do that in a moment. But more likely you're interested in this case, SSO between different applications. So the SSO silent method will allow you to sign in the user and obtain tokens without an interaction. However, if the user has multiple user accounts already active with Azure AD, then they'll have to see a account selection screen that we just saw previously. If you need to bypass that screen, you'll have to pass some sort of account identifier. This could be a session ID or a login hint, such as the UPN or the preferred username, or an MSAL account object. And there are many ways you could do this. For instance, let's say you have a company portal application and your users sign in there and then they obtain an ID token. And then you have a link on that company portal to your MSAL React application. You can redirect the user to MSAL React with some account identifier login hint in the query parameters. And then you can grab them and then just pass them to the SSO silent method. Or there are some other methods as well. But the important thing to keep in mind when using this API is that if your browser, like Safari, is blocking third-party cookies, this will fail. It will fail with the interaction required authentication error, and you'll have to catch this error and handle it with an interactive login API. So let's go ahead and do this. So grab the username from the params, let's say, and I'm not going to do this, but I want to look into the error handling process first. So we have to catch this error. There we go. We need to import this. This is an error provided by MSAL browser. Browser is fine. Okay, now if that happens, I'm just gonna use login redirect again. And let's also pass our scopes here. So now I have an active session with Diego. So let's say I pass Diego's username as a login hint here. And then let's run this. So I'm going to close this app here. I already have an active session already. So I'll go ahead and fire a new instance of my browser. And I'll go to localhost 3000. All right. That did not work for now. Let's do this again. Okay, now I'm signed in automatically. So because we are using session storage, as soon as we are closing our browser, all of our cache is gone. So I want to get into these details a bit more. I also want to see what's going on, what the MSAL is doing at that moment. I want to get some logs here so that it can help with my troubleshooting and debugging. So let's go ahead and talk about these configuration details. So I'll come back here. And I'm going to add a cache option and a system option. And I want to talk what these are. So let's take a look at caching first. So MSAL browser and MSAL React will cache your authentication artifacts, and I will talk about in more details what those artifacts are, in either the session storage, which is by default, and it will go away when you close your browser, or the local storage, which doesn't have an expiry date and will allow you to have SSO between tabs of your same application instance. And you also have the option of memory storage. So the local storage and session storage are considered secure, provided that your application doesn't have vulnerability to cross-site scripting attacks. And if you want to make sure for this, you should follow the OWASP XSS prevention cheat sheet. But beyond that, there are several mechanisms that Azure AD ensures that your applications are secure. So for instance, the single page applications or public client applications in general will have an access token that is valid only for 1 hour, and refresh and ID tokens that are valid only for 24 hours. So if you are familiar with confidential client tabs, you can realize that this is much shorter than in the confidential client case. You also have some opt-in mechanisms like proof of possession, which cryptographically binds your access tokens to your browser instance so that those tokens cannot be used outside of that browser context. And there is some work in progress for bringing this feature to refresh tokens as well. And then you also have continuous access evaluation events, which can invalidate your access token at any point in time by the resource server, such as Microsoft Graph. So if you need to support an older browser that doesn't have support for web storage API, the cookie storage option is also available. And you can use this to support older browsers like Internet Explorer, if you still have the support for that. So what are the authentication artifacts MSAL obtains from AAD? So the reason for obtaining these is that MSAL tries to facilitate an authentication and authorization process while trying to maintain a good user experience. And to do that, it caches things like access tokens, ID tokens, refresh tokens, account objects. These are persistent. And it also collects metadata about the request, records any errors or the current interaction status. It has some telemetry. It collects telemetry for the performance data and other stuff. And all of these are mainly to help you debugging, maintaining a good user experience, and etc. So I'm going to go back to my code. And I want to change the caching location to local storage. I want to have SSO between tabs. And I'm going to set this to false, just to make it explicit. I also want logging. To do that, I can use the logger options property. And I can add a logger callback. And what I want to do is that I just want to console log these messages. Now I need to set up a log level. I'll use verbose. And I can choose if I want to support personally identifiable, if I want to log personally identifiable information or not. I don't want to do this right now, but it could help you later on with debugging. So I'll say this. And I have some errors here. Let's go and fix those. That's fine. So I'll go back to my app. And now I can see the MSAL logs in the console. It tells me what's going on at any moment. So for instance, the application initialize starts, handle redirect starts, there's no interaction in progress, returning null, and etc., etc. And this is very helpful for debugging and troubleshooting. But if you want to cut it short, you can just use, let's say, info. So then let's go ahead and grab an access token and call Microsoft Graph. So let's go ahead and do this. I'll go back to my code. So what I'm going to do is that in my profile component, I have just dummy data. I want to get a real access token and actually call Microsoft Graph. So I'll go ahead and use the use MSAL authentication hook. Thank you. I'm also going to need use state and use effect hooks from React. I'll go ahead and create some state. Let's leave it as null for the moment. Then I'm going to get then I'm going to use this use MSAL authentication hook. So this is a hook that allows you to acquire access tokens with a given interaction type and a given request. So first of all, let's get these interaction types from MSAL browser. So I want to use pop-up as my interaction type. And my request can contain various sorts of information. I'm just going to pass user read. I want an access token with this permission. And then I'm going to get the result. And if there are any errors, the error object. So I'll go ahead and run this on component mount. So let's check for, if you have the graph data already, let's check for that and we don't have to do anything. I'll just cast this to a Boolean. We can return. Let's also check if we have any errors. Let's console log them. We might have a chance to handle that error later on. And then do nothing for now. And if you have the result, if the authentication, if the access token acquisition is successful, let's go ahead and get the access token from this guy. And now I want to make a fetch call to the Microsoft Graph API. So let me just create another file to put this logic into. I'll go ahead and create this fetch.js. I'll define a method. I need an endpoint and an access token. So what I'm going to have is that let's have our headers for our request. Thank you. Now I need to define that. Awesome. Let's make it more clear. Then I'm also going to need a method. Sorry, options. Thank you, Copilot. And now we can do a fetch call and get the response and catch any errors if we have. Awesome. Now let's import this in our profile component, profile page, fetch data. Okay, now I want to pass the endpoint to the where I can get the user's profile information. That is going to be me graph.microsoft.com v-v.1 and me endpoint, and I'll get the response. I'll set the graph data with that response. I'll catch any errors if there are errors. Let's add our dependencies here as well. So we'll have a dependency on graph data and error and result. Okay, now I have this. I don't need this dummy data anymore. I'm going to pass the graph data here. And I also want to conditionally render this prop only if I have graph data already. There we go. Now this should work. We should get an access token. And then we should call this endpoint with our access token, and we should get the response. Okay, let's go ahead. Click on profile. And voila. Now we have the actual data from Microsoft Graph. So that concludes the token acquisition part. I will hand it over to Salman for now to discuss about continuous access evaluations.
Yes, hi everyone. One of the features that we wanted to discuss today is continuous access evaluation, or CAE. CAE allows Microsoft Graph to revoke an active session in response to security events, like account revocation, account disablement, deletion, user location change, user risk increase. We encourage admins to enable CAE in their tenants because Graph will reject your access tokens and will send back a claim challenge that your developer needs to handle. Which leads me to my next item, how to handle CAE challenges. When the Graph API rejects the access token, it will send you a response with an error 401. From this response authenticated header, you will extract an encoded claim. This claim is called claim challenge. We will decode this claim and pass it to MSAL acquire token API to re-authenticate the user and acquire a fresh new token. So how do we do this in our application? The first step we need to do is to configure the MSAL application to declare it as capable of handling challenge. Then we grab the authentication header from the 401 response. After that, we will process the header and pass the claim to the MSAL as a request. Let's actually dive into the code. It's hard to test this live because it takes some time to trigger. So we'll just go through the code at this point.
Sure.
So
let me get the code. I'm
if
gonna
you can switch the
save our
branches.
progress here. I'll call this demo. Let's add our code here.
Perfect.
I'll push this.
And for everyone who is asking about the code, we have a final branch that includes everything. If you would like to take a look at the final sample, that'll be great.
And let's check out this branch. There we go. So I just jumped the branches. And where would you like to look at?
I would like to look at the MSAL configuration. So as I said before, the first thing that we need to do is declare our application as capable of handling challenge. And we do this by saying client capabilities is CP1. After declaring this, we go to the same request in the fetch file. This is exactly the same fetch request that Dugan sent to a Graph API. The only difference here is the function of handling claim challenge when we receive the response. When we receive the response back from Graph, we'll check if the response was rejected with a status 401, and if the header includes authenticated, and then we will extract the claim challenge, as you can see there, and store it in the session storage to be used in a different time. So at this point, let's go to the profile component when we call Graph again. So at this point, when we call Graph and Graph rejects our access token, he will ask us to re-authenticate again and pass the claim challenge to MSAL request object. And this is exactly what we do in line 10. We basically see if the storage has the claim challenge, and if it does have the claim challenge, we pass it in the request and we receive a new fresh token that allows us to access Graph and receive the new data that we wanted. And that's basically it for claim challenge. I will pause here if someone have any questions. If not, Dugan continue with his tutorial.
Yeah, there are many ways to pass this claims object. Here we are using session storage for convenience, but you can come up with alternative ways to pass the claims challenge to MSAL. I'm going to continue with deploying our app to Azure Static Web Apps. So let me just briefly discuss what static web apps are. The Azure Static Web Apps is a service that automatically builds and deploys your full stack web apps. So if you're familiar with App Service, this is very similar to App Service, but geared toward single page applications and applications that are running in the browser mainly. So the main advantage that it provides is that it will globally distribute your static content, meaning that your pages will load faster. It also has very good integration with GitHub and Azure DevOps, and setting up a CI/CD pipeline is very easy with that. And it also integrates with Azure Functions as a serverless backend web API. So you could use that as well. I will go back to my application, and I'm going to deploy this to static web apps. Let's go check out our demo branch again. So we already pushed this actually. So what I can do is that I'm going to go to okay, so I'll go to the Azure. I'll switch tenants because I don't have a subscription here. There we go. Now I need to find the static web apps service. It's here. If it's not, you can just search for it here. I'll go ahead and select that. And I'll create a static web app. So I'll need to fill in this information. This is my subscription. And I need a resource group. I already have one, so I'm just going to use that one. I'm going to call this MSAL React demo. I'll select the free tier. That's enough for me at the moment. And I'm going to connect my account with GitHub. So this is already connected, but you'll see a connect your account with GitHub button here probably. And you can go ahead and do that. So once you connect your account, you'll be able to access all your repositories, your organizations, and your branches on GitHub. And this is also available for Azure DevOps as well. So I'll select my own repository. Let's find it. And I want to use the deployment branch. So deployment branch is the same with the main branch that has the bare application. It doesn't have any of the authentication code yet. I'll make a pull request, and hopefully this will trigger the deployment process. I'm also going to select the build presets. I'm using React, so I'll use select React. My application is served from the main route, so that's going to stay as it is. And I don't have a backing web API, function API yet, so I'm going to leave this blank. And yeah, I will be using the build folder as my to have my distributable files. So I'll go ahead and create this. All right, while this is happening, oh, apparently it's done. So let's go. Awesome. So if I go back to my repo, something has changed here. So I can go to the deployment branch, and I will find this GitHub workflows file. This didn't exist before. The static app service integrated with my GitHub repo added this file. So this is a YAML workflow file. And what it does is that when I have a push or pull request on the deployment branch, this file will trigger. It will build my application, and it will deploy it on Azure Static Web Apps. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and make a pull request. First, I want to make sure that I've built this app. This shouldn't take long. All right, now I want to push this code. I'll go back to my repo. I'll make a pull request. Hopefully there are no conflicts. I'll write something here. I'll create a pull request. And this should now trigger, okay, so merge without waiting for requirements to be met. Okay, don't do this at home, but I'm going to do this. I'll also approve this as myself. Oop. Seriously, I can't. So I'll go back and change this feature. Or let's see if I can merge it already. Salman, can you think you can approve this? I think I need an approval. Yeah, this is a very good feature normally, but now it's blocking us. Okay, actions. Salman, are you there?
I am with you, but I'm trying to find.
I'll see.
Wait. 1 second. Not getting anything though.
Okay, that's bad.
Yeah, I'm not getting anything from my side again.
All right, so unfortunately, we won't be able to deploy. Apparently, we enabled the PR check, and someone needs to, with the right access, needs to approve this. I think I can give you right access. I'll go ahead and check this.
Do you have a deployed instance somewhere just to for the
Yeah.
I don't actually. I was thinking of we can do it together. It's really just one click, but
Okay.
see, that was your GitHub handle.
Yeah, Salman 90, I think.
Okay. There
Yeah,
we
that's
go.
me.
I'll give you right access to approve my PR.
Yay.
Okay, I
One
just gave you.
second. Query review. Okay, it's time though.
So in the meantime, you can go ahead and shoot your questions if you have any. While I'll wait for Salman to approve my PR so that the workflow can run.
Okay, approve granted. See if
Awesome.
changed anything. See if anything changed.
Hopefully. I
The merging
this
is still blocked though.
At least one approving views. Interesting. Okay.
Okay, in the meantime, we'll give Nandish some time to close up the session, and and if you could present the more information deck, Doan, in the meantime.
Sure.
While you are looking at it. Okay.
I think it merged. Didn't merge?
Oh, it merged?
No?
Okay.
I think it's run right now. So let's see if it's deployed. Let's double check if it's here.
I think it just needs time.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and see. And voila, we have it here.
Awesome.
So
that's awesome.
Some certain things are not working.
Okay. That is awesome. So we can take care of those. Nandish, you want to?
Sure. Hey, thanks all for joining the call. I think there are some more questions left in the chat. We'll continue answering them. But thanks a lot, Dogan. This was really, really insightful. I've tried my hands before, but a lot of learning today. Thanks a lot for that. We have a lot of exciting calls coming up in the next month. Again, the third Thursday of every month, Dogan is presenting again the next month, and it'll be like a series. We'll have all the exciting calls. We would love if you could take some time and fill out the survey. This helps us a lot to plan our upcoming calls. In case you loved it, I saw a lot of comments. Please go ahead and put it in the survey so that Dogan gets the information, Kalyan gets the information, I get the information, and we're able to take it and plan our next calls. All right, thanks a lot for joining in. Dogan, any closing comments? Kalyan, Salman?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And yeah, hopefully we'll have a similar session on Angular as well, MSAL Angular as well.
Yeah, the next one would be a similar session, but on Angular. We hope to see you all there again. And the recording, the deck, all the other links would be available on the Yammer post in a few days. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for it.
And if you have any additional question, reach out.
Good point. I just wanted to point out the one point that I missed. We have put the links for the YouTube channel as well as the blog where we'll be putting this information. Yammer will get it, the blog will get it, as well as the YouTube channel will get it. Here is where you have to go for the YouTube. And the next call is on August 22nd at 9 a.m. PST. And that's the community call calendar. Go ahead and download that. Check out our YouTube link as well as our blog. All right, thank you. We'll continue answering questions on the chat. Thanks a lot. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.